Hello and welcome to another video. Today I will be demonstrating the process I used to paint up a full UNSC starter fleet from the Halo Fleet Battles starter set. As you can see, I've got an example of the Marathon class cruiser and the Paris class frigate in front of me. These particular ones I had to strip earlier as I was experimenting with trying to get the paint scheme just about right. So first of all, I'll be doing the usual of reprimering them in black surface primer by Vallejo, of course thinned out so it doesn't clog the airbrush. I'm going to speed this up because it's just putting an even layer of primer on the model. Not much to talk about other than be careful not to clog the detail, as one thing I've noticed with these miniatures is that there are a lot of panel lines, and if you go a bit too heavy on your paint, you're likely to fill in a lot of that detail. The next stage after priming is to lay down our base color. In this instance, we will be using Cold Gay from the Vallejo Game Air range. As with laying down the primer, we want to be careful not to overdo it with the base coat, as once again the detail is fine and clogs rather easily. That aside, nothing complicated with all of the models, just a couple of thin coats of the base color and you are done. Just a quick OH&S warning, do this in a well ventilated area. What you can't see is that I'm actually wearing a respirator and I've got a fume extractor running just behind me. This is the stage where we will be laying down our first highlight with the airbrush. The colours we'll be using are a 50-50 mix of dead white and Stonewall grey, of course thinned to make it flow through the airbrush a lot easier. An additional point here, you will want to err on the side of thinning too much rather than not enough, as the aim is to fire the airbrush at a fairly low PSI, say I usually put mine between the 1 and 2 bar, in order to get a very fine misting of the highlight color over the most exposed areas. As you can see with this Paris class frigate, I am trying to just gently mist it on the top, and of course I do not know how to use a camera, so let's just skip past this part. Oh, never mind. Yes, so I've already done that with the frigate evidently, and now I'm moving on with the cruiser. As you can see, I'm focusing my highlights towards the top of the ship's superstructure. You'll notice this time that I'm not shooting the airbrush at a particularly high PSI. I've also got the maximum possible aperture that the airbrush can project as locked down to a fairly small area. This ensures that we keep the highlight area very narrow in order to maintain the best possible control. Then again, I am not an expert with an airbrush, so take any of my advice in this aspect with a grain of salt. Of course, camera's playing up again. And it looks like we're going to be doing a lot more of these frigates. There's 27 of these in the box. So yeah, in a way I'm kind of thankful I got this out of the way before I moved on to the Covenant. Camera, I apologize for this. I'll start skipping over this, as the one that is really different from this point on is the carrier. Yeah, you can see I'm focusing all my highlights towards the top of the superstructure and towards the edges of the carrier, leaving the more recessed areas on the base color. On the Spartan Games studio models, they have a little stripe accenting the side. I'm going to replicate that effect. As you can see, I've already taped off the models using Tamiya modeling tape. The color I will be using to do the stripe is Wolf Grey. At this stage you want to shoot your airbrush with a fairly low PSI, sorry for getting it off camera, in order to make sure that you don't flood the patch you're trying to paint. If this happens, it is highly likely that the paddle lines will actually carry the paint under the tape and ruin your paint job. So just be careful at this stage and try to focus on dusting the paint on rather than slathering it. For the Paris class frigates, I'm going to take some of the paint I used for my airbrush and just do the lot by hand. Sorry for the arm view. Yeah, so I'm not going to force you to watch me paint all 27 of these, so I will see you very shortly. Now, for the most tedious stage of the entire process. I'm going to put an edge highlight on every raised edge of every model. All 27 frigates, 4 cruisers, and 1 carrier. You'll notice that I've been repeating that number 27 a lot. I apologize, but yeah, having to do that many models has been the bane of my existence, especially with so much else on my workbench. So the color I will be using is Vallejo model color, Off-White, thinned pretty substantially, and I'll be just trying to hit the most raised edges. Once again, sorry for getting it off camera, but yeah. Anyway, let's speed this up. And that is 1 down. So yeah, as you can see, raised edges, edge highlighting, not a particularly hard concept to grasp if you're the kind of person who actually has managed to make it this far through this video. So, that's 1 down. And, come on, yep, that many more to go. I'll see you later. Now we are on to the wash stage. Now I'm not doing this in a traditional miniature painting sense, as the wash I'm using is not one of the Games Workshop or Vallejo nice to use washes. Instead, I'm going to use some scale modeling stuff, some MIG Productions dark wash in this case. Now this is an oil-based wash. That means it tends to have much less surface tension than water, and it really does manage to hit up the panel lines and the recessed areas very nicely, simply by that virtue of being able to flow more easily into all the crevices and not linger on the large flat surfaces. And even better yet, it can also be rubbed off fairly easily with some thinner. Now what you didn't see is that I've already gone ahead and, yeah, there's me helpfully pointing it out, gave the model a quick brush coat of floor polish, basically. If you're an American, the product to use is Pledge Future Shine. If you're an Australian, that one seems to work, as I've never been able to find Pledge in this country. So yeah, this stage is absolutely nothing fancy. Just give it an all-over coat, try to do an even coverage, and just watch the stuff flow right into all those normally hard-to-reach recesses. So if I was trying to do this, say, a panel line wash or a pin wash with the more conventional washes, it would be a nightmare, and I'd probably end up making a lot of mistakes anyway. So with this, at least with this, it doesn't matter what you do, just as long as you get the wash on the model. Also, fair warning, do not use your good brushes with this process. It will, like, ruin them. Be warned. And there you go, it's pretty much done. So same thing with the big ship. Yeah, just put it down and watch those panel lines get filled in. It's quite neat, actually. Anyway, there's not much more to it than this, so I'm gonna skip over, well, the rest of the slathering down the wash stage. Now we're on the stage of removing the wash. I've already went ahead and put a bit of it on an older rag, and now I'm starting to buff off the most exposed areas of the ship, leaving the wash in the recesses. So yeah, this is pretty neat. It's just, you can already see results happening the few moments I actually can keep the model in camera. Anyway, there's also a lot of harder to reach areas, so I'm just going over and hitting those with a cotton bud. Not too hard. With this stage, you don't want to press down too hard or too long, as eventually the thinner will eat through the floor polish that is protecting the underlying paint job. What I was doing there with the tweezers was removing some fiber that had managed to get ripped off the cotton bud and stuck on the model, so I wanted to make sure I police up that sort of thing before I move on to subsequent models. This effect is really pronounced on the big models when it starts to happen, and you really get that contrast happening. Anyway, there's not much more to it than what you've seen here, so I will skip ahead to the next major phase. I did it off camera, but I gave the model a coat of satin varnish using the airbrush to protect our work, and we'll move on to the final stage, which is the engine glow. So first of all, we'll lay down the base color of this, and the color in this instance is magic blue. Yeah, sorry, I had to just go look it up. Couldn't quite see on the camera. Anyway, once again, with our highlight, we want to keep this very, very thin. So that's why you just see me just quickly padding out a few blasts to make sure I'm getting the consistency right. So I'm firing a fair bit directly into the engine, I don't know, cowls, right into where the thrust comes out, and also dusting it around the edges. I'm also giving the smaller engines on the frigates a bit of a blast as well. Now we're moving on to the second highlight, I think. Yeah, the second highlight. So, well, highlight's a strange word for this because it's more or less the opposite, as the glowing is coming from deep within the engine. So we're firing, in this case, some electric blue, very thin once again, directly into the engine, and also just on the tips of it to give that impression of light reflecting. And we'll also do this with the Paris class frigates, just try and be more precise with our highlight. Final highlight, we'll be putting a thin glaze of Vallejo model color Offwhite right into the depths of the engine. At this stage, it's a little okay to treat it like a wash because you actually want the light to be coming from the deepest recesses, but try to avoid letting the glaze, I suppose, pull too much. Anyway, this isn't a very time-consuming step, so it's just about done, and a thing to note is that we won't actually be doing it for the Paris class frigates as well. I just imagine that they're a bit too small for this sort of treatment to be worth it. So, with that final glaze in place, time to move on to the final review. I'd only intended this to be a quick paint job, not necessarily a extreme quality one, and in that sense I think I succeeded pretty well. Yeah, colors, shades, highlights, I'm quite happy with how this turned out. One thing I'm not too happy with is some of the overspray that you can see on the carrier's engines. It puts some of the highlights in weird places which probably shouldn't be, where they probably shouldn't be, rather. So if I was going back and doing this again, I'd mask some of the areas off before I put down those initial engine glow highlights. That aside, I did learn a lot from this project. There's a lot I can apply to my Firestorm Armada renewal once I get around to it, as well as my Planetfall, Dystopian Wars, basically a huge pile of stuff that I have promised myself I'll get around to getting to eventually. In terms of painting though, the Covenant, well, once I have a break from the scale, will be next off the rack. I don't think I'll be using an oil wash on them, because I haven't had too much of a look at the miniatures, so I'm not sure it'll be appropriate given the curved shapes and large flat areas without seams. But I have seen some deep recesses that would probably work well with some kind of wash. Truthfully, I don't really want to have to do the oil wash again, as it's kind of difficult to work with at times, especially if you're not in a particularly well ventilated area. Yeah, the cruisers came out pretty well, I think. Yeah, the highlights of the engine glow were a bit more reasonable, didn't overspray as much, so quite happy with that. Well, that's it. Project over. I'm running out of space in my display cabinet, and I look forward to starting the Covenant soon enough. Yeah, usual YouTube stuff. Like, comment, subscribe if you feel like it. Share it with people who might be interested in this sort of thing. I figure since it's Halo Spaceboats, it'll probably interest more than a few people who normally wouldn't be interested in miniatures. Don't have a Patreon, don't want one, probably won't get one. I work for a living, thankfully, which fortunately grants me a degree of creative freedom, so I think next up I'll try something a bit more high quality. I'm thinking something with my Malifaux collection, but yeah, we'll have to wait and see once the recording gets done and the editing is complete. So, I will see you all later. Have a good one.